are seeing some very promising results in macaws, which are an old world monkey.
I thought macaws were birds, like parrots.
They're both.
There's two different macaws of vastly different species.
I think so. Isn't that how you say macaws?
Hey everybody, and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore, and I'm joined by my two co-hosts, Bailey Perkins. Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Scott Melson. How are you, sir?
So, man, it is Friday.
Indeed. We always record. Well, we don't always record on Fridays, but usually.
Sometimes we have emergency pods.
Man, that's true. But these days, every day is an emergency.
I know. Bailey, you haven't done an emergency pod with us yet, have you?
I did.
You did?
I think one of the COVID ones, the first COVID one. Emergency pod. So.
That's right. Yeah. I love emergency pods.
And now it's a fresh hell every day. So today,
dude, it's May 1st. We're opening up. Everything's fine.
It's May Day, which is like ironic in many regards. So yes, today we're recording. It's Friday, May 1st. And as I'm sure all of our listeners are aware, effective today, the state of Oklahoma has relaxed some of its safer at home rules and allowed certain businesses to reopen. We have a neighbor friend that is a nail tech, and she said she has to go back to work today. She was not super excited about it. And so it was interesting to talk through the safeguards they're taking. And she said, it's, in order to really play it safe, it's so silly to like do all that. It doesn't make sense. Like financially, it doesn't make sense. Relationally with customers. So anyway, so the state is not fully reopened, but we're phase 1 or phase 2, whatever we're on.
Oklahoma is open for business.
And Andy, a soft plug for the Lost Ogle, because they did a little column about like the top 10 places in Penn Square Mall to get the Rona as a, jokingly way, but the fact that the mall is opening today as well.
And, before we were recording, we were talking about, seems like that is not the first place on my list of places I've got to go when this pandemic is over. I'm not itching for an Annie Ann's pretzel or something. The Lego store. I don't know.
The places that are first on my list are not open yet.
No. And, I'll be like, I've been okay for the most part. We've been home with the baby and, like it's nice outside. We can go for walks. But really now the weather's warming up. Like today I was dying to go to Fassler Hall and like sit out there with you guys and like have a big stein of beer and their like Mediterranean lamb sausage hero hot dog situation. I was like, man, that sounds so good. But we can't do it. So we'll wait longer. So let's kind of get into it and let's talk about what's happened this week. So reportedly the state has received about $1.2 billion in federal funding from the Federal CARES Act to fight the coronavirus pandemic. So it's to fight it and to like fill in budget holes from it. And this week we got a little more information about how that money's being spent. Yesterday on Thursday, Governor Stitt announced a new mobile testing program for underserved areas. They also announced they're going to expand testing to anyone who wants it, even those without symptoms, which is something we've talked about as being a need, right? And they said you can get that at any of the state's 80 drive-through testing locations. Also, Health Commissioner Gary Cox said that their goal is to test 90,000 Oklahomans during this month alone. And they're also dramatically expanding the number of contact tracer staff from about 150 we have now to more than 1,000, right? And Scott and you and I were talking, there was experts kind of say that the number you need of contact tracers is 30 tracers per 100,000 in the population. So for Oklahoma, that would be about 1,100. So holy moly, we might actually kind of reach a goal that health experts have set out for us. Scott, I'll go to you first. How are these changes going to affect Oklahoma's response to the pandemic?
Yeah, so regular listeners will know that when it comes to commenting on the response to coronavirus by the state of Oklahoma, I have been somewhat critical in terms of what we've done so far. So it may come as a surprise to folks to hear this, but this is unequivocally good news. Like this is something to feel good about. I mean, testing, to test another 90,000 in addition to the test that we've already done. That is, I think it's a great goal. I think you could make a case that it maybe should even be a bit more than that. But I'm looking at the executive order report that was submitted yesterday. The one for today has not come out yet, but so far there's been 66,866 tests submitted. Now, some of those are going to be duplicates because there are people who get multiple tests for various reasons, but call it 66,000. So 90,000 on top of that. I mean, I think that's a very solid goal, but equally important to that is this goal to have 1,000 people doing contact tracing, because particularly if you're not going to test everyone, which as we talked about is a really lofty goal. If you're not going to test everyone, then you have to have robust contact tracing, and having something like 1,100 contact tracers in Oklahoma would put us in a position to I think approach that. So this if I had my way, we would do these things before we took some of the steps that we're taking right now, right? Like I'd love to have the 1,100 contact tracers and the 90,000 additional tests done before we start opening things up, but that's not where we're at, So this is good. There's absolutely no there's no other way to put it except to say this is a good goal, and this is the kind of concrete stuff that I wish we'd been hearing a little bit earlier. Like, we're going to test this many people, we're going to do it by this day, we're going to have this many contact tracers. So this is, I think, a level up from response that we had seen previously, which is excellent. I also would say too, one piece of data that Paul Monies, who's does great work over at Oklahoma Watch, put out on Twitter today. So he plotted out a really important data point, which is what our positive cases are. Like, our new positive cases is a percentage of total cases tested, total specimens tested. That number is going down, which is excellent. That does suggest that we are seeing a true slowing of the epidemic. It's gone from 8% to about 6% now, which is another really good data point. So I wish that's a data point that was getting more talking points rather than talking about deaths and hospitalizations, which seems to be what a lot of public officials are focusing on.
Could that also be a function of just increased testing, though?
So it seems like it would be, right, but it's not, because you would suspect that you would, as you test more people, that the number of positives will go up, assuming the epidemic stays static, right? So if the epidemic is staying static,
it's not proportional. 10, yeah,
right. So assuming that the epidemic is static at, say, a 7% positivity rate, which is what we've been at for a while, then if you test 100 people, 7% will be positive. If you test 1,000 people, 7% will be positive. If you test 100,000 people, 7% will be positive, right? But if you see that number going down as the number of tests go up, that tells you that either the epidemic is slowing or that prevalence was not as wide as we thought, right? And I think in Oklahoma, it's probably a both and situation, right? I think that a 7% positivity rate is probably high for the state, but it also does seem like there is reason to think that our epidemic curve is trending down, which is unequivocally good news.
Right. And from the data I've seen, it looks like the curve is going down, but at a pretty slow pace, right?
Yeah,
and this really depends on how wide you drag the graph you just made.
Right.
But it looks like it's not going to be a steep up and steep down situation. It was a steep increase, and it'll slowly fade for a long time.
I think that seems to be right. But I think there's like, one of the reasons for that is that we cut the steep increase off, right? Like, instead of letting it get 2 or 3 times as high as it did, we stopped it, right? And then you kind of take all those. It's not that all the people that were going to get coronavirus now won't, right? You're trying to get it so that they get it over a much longer period of time and don't overwhelm the healthcare system.
Right. Definitively flattening the curve, right? If people pay attention to that little animation we've all seen, it's either steep up and steep down, or it's more slow up and then a slow down that takes a long
Yeah.
time. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah. And we'll see. I mean, we'll see how this goes, right? We'll see how things look in 4 weeks at the end of May, whether we're going to continuing to take steps to open up, more parts of the economy and relax restrictions further, or whether we have to backtrack. I don't think any of us know. So the other thing is that I think we may be closer to a vaccine than we had initially thought. A lot of us have heard the numbers put out there by Dr. Fauci and other public health experts that we're 12 to 18 months away from a vaccine on the short side, and it could easily be longer than that. But there's a group out of Oxford who has maybe got a significant head start because they had been working on a vaccine to another form of coronavirus, but they have now kind of modified that to be a vaccine for the SARS-CoV-2 or the coronavirus vaccine. And because they had already done preliminary testing on the previous version of the vaccine and showed that it was safe. So now they can enter the next phase of trials. So they're several months at a very minimum ahead of everybody else. And they're saying that if this is demonstrated to be safe and effective, and they can get emergency approval from the appropriate regulatory bodies, they could have several million doses available by September, which is
That's huge.
Yeah, that's amazing, right? And this is, as you guys know, anybody who listens to the show, I listen to the Weeds podcast a lot from Vox Media, and they had a really fascinating discussion on their last episode about how much different this outbreak, this search for a vaccine, is than many other outbreaks we've faced in the past, because this is so new and it's taking such a devastating toll that if you can move up the vaccine process or treatment process by even a few months, as opposed to the mumps vaccine, right? By the time you had a vaccine for mumps had been endemic for several decades. And so if you got the vaccine 3 months earlier, that didn't make much difference. Whereas a vaccine 3 months earlier in the setting of coronavirus is tremendous. So if
life-saving.
Yeah, right. And so if this happens, right, if this group at Oxford is right and their inoculation is safe and it is effective, and they can start getting this out to people by September, man, that's a big deal.
But one piece to that too, I just hope folks that don't get too comfortable once a vaccine is developed, because there are some things that we need to add into our way of life that we've developed during this season of coronavirus to make sure that we're protected in the long term. So this idea of maintaining social distancing and many restaurants and places having the protective mechanism above to keep distance from people, and I think a lot of those things should stay. So hopefully we'll see some changed behaviors as we go through the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah. So I think overall this sounds like pretty positive news about the numbers related to the COVID outbreak in Oklahoma in particular. However, not all news about how the money's being spent in our state has been positive. On Tuesday of this week, the Oklahoman reported that the state had canceled a $9.5 million purchase of those N95 masks because the FBI was investigating the person or the company selling them, which to me sounds like a bad eBay seller review. For those of us who are old enough to remember heavy use of eBay, I guess Amazon now, it's only a 2-star seller, and the FBI was looking into it, and they said specifically that Oklahoma was identified as a potential victim of their fraudulent activity related to some Chinese-produced ventilators, and so they were investigating it. And from what I read in the Oklahoman story, which we'll link to in the show notes, it sounds like there was an intermediary who was basically saying, listen, I got to have half the money so I can give it to the factory because they're not going to make them until we get half the money, like a half now, half on delivery kind of deal, which isn't terribly uncommon. But
no, now see what I need is what I need from you is I need half now I need half later. Okay, and when you give me the half an hour I go get for you, I bring back. That's my Russian mobster.
I was like, you're just offending a different nationality now, but
that's my Russian mobster voice.
That makes sense. I, recently signed a consulting contract. It was a half now, half at the end kind of deal. However, mine was significantly less than $9.5 million and didn't involve a different country, or life-saving medical equipment. Also on Tuesday, the Oklahoman reported that Attorney General Mike Hunter has requested that the state auditor's office conduct yet another investigation of the State Department of Health. And I say yet another because we all remember a couple of years ago that saga. Man, Scott, I remember being in the upper room studios recording that where we had to write it out. And it was like a page and a half of play-by-play.
Bonkers.
Just to figure out what was going on.
Just to find the money.
Yeah, it was still there, right? That They didn't actually, it was hidden under a mattress somewhere in that old building. So this investigation or this audit is specifically to look at how the State Department of Health has been handling COVID-19 related purchasing decisions. Bailey, how are they making these decisions, and specifically who's the person or people that are making most of these decisions?
So you'll remember that the legislature gave the authority to the governor to oversee certain agencies, particularly the Oklahoma State Department of Health. This emerged right after the situation that Andy referenced a couple of years ago, where it was what happened to the $30 million, what's going on here. And so after that, the legislature gave the governor the authority to oversee this agency in that way. And so Governor Stitt put, let me make sure I am getting his name right, Gino DeMarco, who was one of the deputy tourism directors ahead of the PPE acquisition hunt. So he was in charge of finding for the state, how can we maximize the state's dollar by getting more supplies for a competitive rate. And so DeMarco ordered gloves and other supplies through a company called Torque Capital LLC that's based in Oklahoma City that hasn't been in existence for a long time. And on top of that, they got this finder's fee for finding these supplies, but then come to find out the person that they're getting the supplies through was being difficult, and they still haven't received the items for purchase. And so this is leading the Attorney General of Oklahoma to call an investigation to see what's going on with this. So I guess to circle back all those pieces, it's a person Governor Stitt appointed to oversee PPE, but the person that he's contracted with found supplies, but the supplier is a little sketchy.
Yeah, I think the governor refers to him as his PPE czar. But yeah, his background is he's an oil and gas guy, and then he was at the Department of Tourism, and now he's in charge of this. So he's not necessarily like a supply chain guy, right? He's not like Tim Cook at Apple that was a supply chain guru. But it sounds like there's been some questionable expenses somewhere in there.
I mean, I don't know. This is typically what I do, right? Like when I'm looking to hire somebody to like work on my house or like manage a project, I try to find a company that has been around for as short a time as possible and doesn't appear to have any like experience relevant to the job that I want them to do. And then I ask them to kind of take the lead on it for me. And it's never like, I mean, it's always worked out well for me. So,
and you give him half up front.
Yeah. And then I give him half up front to kind of grease the skids a little bit. So
This actually is a good point as a reminder to Oklahomans everywhere. It is storm season. You may have hail in your area, and as soon as you do, 1,000,000 roofers will descend upon your neighborhood. Many of them are not from around here. Many of them just bought a hammer and a ladder last week, or maybe during the storm even, and now they say they're a roofer. That is not the case. You should definitely, whether it's roofing or, purchases of PPE for millions of healthcare workers in your state, you should vet the companies with whom you're doing business.
And there's typically usually an approval process of vetting different companies that the state contracts with in most things. And so it's very unusual to see us, in a way to kind of visualize it, do a Google search of, who could find me PPE and randomly pick someone that hasn't been vetted. I mean, Andy, to your analogy, the Oklahoman reported that Torque Capital is described on its website as a global food export company sending chicken, pork, beef, and other agricultural products from Americas to Asia, which I don't see anything related to supply chains or PPE production or anything within that description of what they do. So this was somebody gave me a good deal and it sounded good, so we went with it.
Well, and when I sent the article to Scott, or put it in Slack for both of you, Scott's first inclination was like, who's he related to? Like, are we going to find out in a couple of days that this is, some commissioner's cousin or brother or whatever? And
right. I mean, like that's, and in all seriousness, like the idea here of like hiring a private company or like finding like a middleman to be in charge of procurement is not crazy, right? Like that's not it's something that I think is I'm not a business person myself, but I think it's something that's kind of commonly done in the business world, and that may be why the governor's inclination is to go that direction. But like, I mean, you just find someone who that's what they do, not like a rando who like, there's nothing wrong with being someone whose predominant business is exporting, meat products to Asia. Like that's great, but that typically is not like, someone who, does healthcare supply chain management. Although actually, as I'm thinking about it, so see if this makes sense. So his job, right? This Torque Capital, they were supposed to get gloves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a meat exporter, maybe you buy a lot of gloves.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well,
right?
You know a guy, right?
Right. I mean, so like maybe that's why he was the finder's fee. Is like, hey, I need gloves for my meat. You guys need gloves for healthcare. We can you pay me a little. You give me a little something, and I'll hook you up with my glove guy, and we'll get you 3 million pairs of gloves for Oklahomans.
So I think this is part of the deal, right? Is that this is an unprecedented situation, and all this stuff that we need: gloves, masks, gowns, webcams, like all these things that we need. Literally everyone in the world needs them too, right? It's not just like a hurricane in one state, and so like Florida needs this stuff, but like Montana doesn't. Like everybody needs this immediately, and most of this stuff is produced in the one country where this all started and everything shut down, right? So most of this stuff is produced in China. China got it, obviously, the virus kind of took off there. And so as China, they like dipped supply, right? Like they cut off production of a bunch of stuff, t-shirts, all this, everything, right? And so once it spread, then the rest of the world's demand goes way up, but production is down so much that things are in short supply. I've been trying to purchase some live streaming supplies for CivicsCon, which is coming up in a few weeks. We'll talk more about that later. And I needed a device to connect my nice camera to my computer, and they've been out of stock everywhere, like for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I would call around. I'd call companies in New York. I'd call companies in California, companies in Seattle, and they all import from the same place, right? And no one knew when it was going to come in. They're like, we might get 3 next week. We have no idea. We've ordered, 2,000, but we don't know when they're coming in. And so I just kept calling, hoping I would like strike up a friendship with someone over the phone, and that maybe they would slip a little USB capture device like in the mail to me rather than somebody else. Maybe what I should have done is grease the wheels and like slipped him a Mickey to help it happen. What is a Mickey? How does that that's not drugs, is it? I don't know what a Mickey is. So I'm curious if this is, the state's fault, middleman's fault, or if this is a symptom of this global epidemic that we're not prepared for, right? Like the last time we had one of these was 100 years ago, and the world was fundamentally different in every way.
I think it's who is it that's one of the Silicon Valley like tech people is like move fast and break things, right? Like that's the like kind of the new like startup mentality. And I think that people are kind of bringing sometimes that mentality to fighting coronavirus, which is good. But this situation, I think, does show that we still need to, when we're going through things and spending taxpayer money, like we need to still do due diligence, right? Like we still need to, it is certainly okay that some of the normal like regulatory mechanisms that we have in place, maybe we don't have to abide by all those. Maybe we suspend those in order to get, supplies and medications, as quickly as we need them. But you still have to make sure that you're giving money to like a real company and not one that's being investigated by the FBI for making like, crap ventilators.
Right.
And it takes time to be able to do that type of research. But when you are somebody who has expertise in procurement, you know how to look for the red flags. And I think sometimes we get stuck in trying to find, what's going to give me the best price at bottom line. And that's a huge risk that you take when you try to find the cheapest versus what's going to be the most reliable. And so I think that's something that the administration and hopefully the agency will be more thoughtful about going forward, that we can't just try to quickly look for what's going to be the cheapest, but really, as Scott said, do our due diligence to make sure that we're protecting taxpayer money.
Right. Speaking of taxpayer money, the legislature is supposed to come back into session next week, rumor has it, and reconvene to resume budget talks or get down to brass tacks. The problem, of course, is that the state is expected to have somewhere between $800 million and $1.3 billion less than they did this year. So somewhere between a giant and enormous budget hole. But the legislature is not sure how much, right? They think around 800. The governor's office says 1.3 billion. That's a difference of roughly $500 million, which seems like a really big variation in estimates.
Yeah. And this does not include money for Medicaid expansion.
Oh, right. They need an extra 150 million or something for that, right?
Right.
And which is expanding either way, right? Like
right.
The governor's expanded it, and then the people get to vote on it in June. So there's a really great non-doc article from today, I think, that talks about this. Was again traced with some really great quotes from the budget chairmans from both the House and the Senate, Wallace and Thompson, respectively. And they sound, I'll say, downright frustrated at the governor's office.
Cantankerous, even.
Cantankerous, yeah. That they feel like it sounds like they can't get straight answers, even when they ask. Wallace made some reference to as a sports analogy and being in the lead and trying to run timeout. What do you guys, do you think we're all going to get cut? Like all of the state agencies are going to get cut? Who's going to get it the worst? And do you think education will be held harmless?
I mean, I think so. That non-doc has a great piece on this, and what they're saying is, well, what the legislative leadership is saying is, all right, so the governor got all this COVID money, and he's not telling us how he's going to spend it, and he's particularly not telling us how much is going to go to education, and he's telling us to prepare, we need to be writing a budget for a $1.3 billion shortfall, and which is cuts of like 7.5% across the board for the next fiscal year. And they're like, the reason that we feel like, to quote a friend of mine, that dog don't hunt, is because the governor's office also sent letters to the directors of all these state agencies asking them to prepare budgets for 3% cuts. So they're like, what's the real number? Is it 3%? Is it 7.5%? I think everybody's operating under the assumption that there's going to be less money next year, but the question is how much. And in state budget terms, a 4.5% difference is a big, big difference. So the legislative leadership is asking the governor, like, where are you getting these numbers, and what are you doing with the coronavirus money? But what Mr. Representative, I think Wallace is the one who made the point about running the clock out, is that the legislature has to pass a budget by the 29th of May. Constitutionally, that's what they have to do, right? And the governor, as far as I understand it, doesn't have to tell anybody how he's going to spend this $1.2 billion in coronavirus money from the CARES Act. So the governor's kind of saying, like, all right, I've given you the numbers I'm going to give you, and I'm going to go do my thing. You guys prepare the budget.
Is this like when you're married and one member, Bailey's already nodding, when one of you gets some money, you find an extra 50 or something, and your buddy gives you $40 to help him move, and you're like, this is my money. This is not your money. This is my money. I'm going to spend it on whatever I want to spend it on, and you can't say anything about it. The governor got some of my money.
That's what it feels like. But it's also an interesting dynamic from a political science standpoint of how these two bodies are functioning or not functioning together, especially with the legislature allegedly holding the power of the purse, and now the governor holding the significant amount of money that can make the difference in the budget. It's an opportunity for the governor to flex his authority in the way over the legislature. So it's interesting.
And, the governor has also kind of floated the idea of using some of this money to shore up the, what's the name of the education scholarship credit fund thing, where basically you can donate money and get a tax credit if you donate money into this fund that's used to support scholarships to private schools. And he wants to use some of the money to go into that.
The Henry.
Yeah,
he wants to use, Henry. Yeah.
He wants to use some of the money to go into that. Secretary Hoffmeister, Superintendent Hoffmeister has said she doesn't think that's an appropriate use of the money. It seems like really poor communication. Everybody's like, they're not talking to each other very much. Everybody's like trying to protect their own little fiefdom. The governor, I think, feels like he's been burned by the legislature a few times recently when it comes to tribal gaming, when it comes to the like $200,000 for his like technology infrastructure digital transformation. Right. So it's just, it's I'm the oldest of three. I'm the oldest of three boys. And when we were, getting into it, sometimes my parents would tell us, if y'all are going to get in a pissing contest, go outside. And it feels like that's what we're in right now. I don't know.
At the expense of 4 million Oklahomans. So
it is funny. So, we've been doing Let's Fix This for just over 4 years. This past Monday was our 4-year anniversary, birthday, whatever that appropriate designation is. And we've been doing the podcast for, I guess, 2.5 of that. And so in my short time of really paying attention to the Oklahoma legislature and politics in this state, it seems like history repeats itself very frequently. And from the conversations I've had with folks who have been around a lot longer, it definitely repeats itself. Sometimes the names change, but I was thinking this morning about how I wonder what the cycle is. If it's like a 8-year, 10-year, 15-year like cycle of where like kind of regimes are in power, like, and things operate under a certain modus operandi for a certain amount of time. Like the end of Governor Fallon's tenure was certainly a shift, where we saw often the House versus the Senate versus the governor's office, and in that 3-way tie, there would be different alliances. And since Stitt's taken in or gotten in office this year in particular, the first year is everyone's trying to figure their place out, and then this year it's been the legislature versus the governor over and over and over again. And as we discussed last week, I wonder if this is going to be what this is like for him for the rest of his term. He's got 2 more years left. That's got to be exhausting.
And Andy, it's a reflection too of having a person at the helm of the governor's office who doesn't have experience in governance. Because in the past, as you noted, the interactions and those relationships among the House, the Senate, and the governor's office were a lot different. You didn't have the legislature coming together to sue the governor's office in previous years, right? To say, hey, you need to do this because this is part of your job. A lot of the tensions among those 3 areas of, when I say areas, the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, was among policy goals and interpretations, and not fundamental ideas of governance. We didn't see, Governor Fallin trying to hold the legislature back from figuring out how to get funds for the budget. I mean, 2 years ago was a different kind of beast with, the fees versus yada yada. But I think what we're experiencing during this administration is unprecedented for Oklahoma politics. And so it will be interesting to see over time, is this going to be the new normal of the House and the Senate, who often have their tensions, standing in lockstep together, saying, this is how we need to move our state forward, because you have, this body in the legislature of folks who have been there, 5, 6, 7 years in governance.
What a weird world. I'm curious to see what happens. This whole coronavirus has got the world upside down. You referenced the legislature suing the governor, and we'll kind of get close to wrapping up here. On one last note from this week is that on Wednesday, a referee of the state Supreme Court heard oral arguments via the telephone in an, I guess it's technically a lawsuit, but a legal action that was filed last week by the League of Women Voters of Oklahoma and 2 individuals, a nurse practitioner and a woman living with cancer. And they had filed a writ of mandamus against the election board. It's against, but a writ of mandamus trying to compel the court, or trying to get the court to compel the election board to make some changes to the instruction sheet that is included with absentee ballots that would effectively mean that voters could self-notarize absentee ballots rather than having to go and meet with a notary face-to-face somewhere, right? So as a public health concern here. And so that was on Wednesday. We don't know how quickly the court will rule, of course. That's up to them. They are still meeting, I think, by telephone, from what I've heard. And we do expect them to issue some kind of ruling relatively quickly, because the deadline for printing ballots is fast approaching for the June election. And I'm going to pause real quick to say, my neighbor uses his leaf blower every single day. This is the 3rd time today he's used his leaf blower. I don't know what he's doing. He blows off the trampoline. He's blowing dirt off the patio. I don't think he owns a broom is the problem, but he's got a gas-powered leaf blower. And I've been home now since February 7th, and this dude uses a leaf blower every day, multiple times. This is my karaoke neighbors, for those of you who follow me on Twitter. So at night, they sing karaoke very loudly, and during the day, it is leaf blowers all day long.
That's so funny.
I digress, but this is what's gonna make me crack in this quarantine.
So if you hear that noise in the background now, you know what's happening.
I've been trying to mute when you guys are talking to limit that, but he fired it up right when I was talking, and it got my goat.
You probably heard that from my end too, because they've been walking by my window with the leaf blowers as well.
Golly. Amy Curran from Generation Citizen was tweeting about it too. I had a call with her the other day about CivicsCon, and she said she had 3 at the same time in her neighborhood going, and she was just about to go insane. So there is some science behind this. Leaf blowers, the pitch at which particularly gas-powered leaf blowers operate, like permeates walls for a long distance, and so they contribute like pretty overtly to noise pollution and at a level that's unhealthy. So I assume that my neighbor sings karaoke so loudly because he's deaf from his leaf blower usage. So that's my assumption. Anyway, I digress.
Well, and Andy, before we go,
Yeah.
it's important to mention on the national level that there is a group organizing a boycott, some call it a strike, on behalf of workers at Walmart, Amazon, Whole Foods, Instacart, and I think a couple of other corporations. During this time, some of these grocers have made a whole lot of money, and some are arguing that they can do more for their workers. And so we'll see how that pans out, over time. And, if it sustains, if the workers are able to negotiate any demands. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, it is. I haven't seen any news about it today to see how widespread it is, but if they were able to get organized, a nationwide like labor walkout or strike would be another huge deal for our country that's going on right now, and very interesting to see how that impacts the overall environment. All right, well, before we go, I do want to issue a reminder and make an announcement that today we officially launched the website and registration for CivicsCon, which is our virtual civics conference about civics, voting, elections, connecting with our neighbors, and building a better democracy. You can go to civicscon.com and find it there. It's if you follow Let's Fix This on social media, we've shared it, or you follow me, I've shared it. And there's on Facebook. It's facebook.com/CivicsCon. It's CivicsCon and everything. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're super excited. So you can see on the website, there's a full list of all the speakers that are going to participate. Maybe not full. I've got a couple more that have yet to be added. I'm waiting on some information. And then also the agenda for the day. We're going to have sessions about gerrymandering and redistricting, about open primaries and ranked choice voting, about voter registration and vote by mail. We're going to have one about running for office, about government transparency and doing advocacy in a virtual world, about how the next generation can save democracy, specifically Generation Z, which is the youngest among us. And we've got, I think, a really cool model here that we're able to pair up, in many cases, national level people. So, the CEO of vote.org, of the National Freedom of Information Association or Coalition, people from Common Cause, people from the National Vote at Home Institute, Open Primaries, Run for Something, these big groups. We have partnered them with folks from here in Oklahoma that are like boots on the ground folks. So Nicole McAfee from ACLU of Oklahoma, Lauren Zuniga. I'm going to be I'm going to kind of moderate some things. AC Facci. We've got a bunch of students from Generation Citizen. They're going to participate. Amy Curran's going to be a part of it. It's going to be a day-long live stream event on Facebook and YouTube, but it'll be interactive. So it's not just, you can certainly set it up and watch while you're working from home, but you can also comment. You can have a dialogue, and we will be able to see that and kind of bring your comments into the conversation as we go along. I am so jazzed. I was up till about 2:30 last night finalizing things. I'm super excited. So that is May 29th. Hopefully all of our listeners have marked their calendars already, but go to civicscon.com and take a look. And big thanks to our co-hosts for this, Generation Citizen and the Oklahoma Humanities. We are very excited. My hope is we do a really good job this year, and we get some good support. Maybe folks could donate a few dollars to make this happen, and we can put all that towards doing it in person next year, hopefully post coronavirus, an actual like live in-person conference where we get to shake hands and hug and see each other. I think that's such a richer experience. I'm cool with technology in many ways, but I'm also growing weary of not being able to hang out with my friends and colleagues. So With that, then, brings us to the end of the show. Bailey, thank you for being here as always.
Thank you, of course.
Dr. Melson, thank you, sir.
Hey, man, I wouldn't miss it.
Don't forget to rate and subscribe to Let's Pod This on Apple Podcasts, because that helps us reach a bigger audience, helps other folks discover us. Please share. My mother-in-law listened to us for the first time this week and said it was not terrible. So we now have 4 or 5 listeners. I've lost count. Congrats to each and every one of you. You can follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Let's Fix This Okay. Scott is at SC Nelson. Bailey is at Bailey M. Perkins. And I am at Andy OKC. You can also make a donation on our website. Check out civicscon.com for information about that. And our podcast is edited and produced by the 3 of us. Let's Pod This is a member of the Mostly Harmless Media Network. Our theme music is called Rhino Funk by artist So Down. Let's Fix This is a nonpartisan, non-profit organization who strives to educate and equip all Oklahomans and people elsewhere to engage with their government. We encourage you to get involved in any way you can, and remember, decisions are made by those who show up. Have a great week.